It is still possible. It is not a hopeless task. We've begun to turn the tide in a remarkable short order. It is still possible to turn the tide on climate change, assures us Bill McKibben. On this 46th anniversary of Earth Day, this morning we are participating in a preach-in, like a sit-in of sorts. We're joining hundreds of other churches across this nation in the United Church of Christ, where we are challenging one another to keep it in the ground. It, of course, being coal, oil, and gas. Usually when we hear about climate change, we think that it's someone's preferences over someone else's. It's the Republicans or Democrats arguing amongst one another, or the environmentalists. And yet it's people against physics, he tells us. And here are the numbers. We have to keep 80% of the fossil fuel reserves that we know about. The oil in the Arctic, the tar in the sands of Canada and Venezuela and in the Caspian Sea, the coal in Western Australia, Indonesia, and China, and the gas that's being fracked in Eastern Europe and here in these United States of America. We have to keep this coal, oil, and gas in the ground. If we don't, they become carbon bombs and they explode. And they push our planet's physical system, heating the earth farther and farther past those red lines drawn by the scientists and the government. It's not, we should think about doing this, this is a good idea, or we'd be wise to do this. Instead, it's simpler that we need to do this now. 5 years ago is when this keep it in the ground became a new idea. Actually, I don't think it was a new idea. It was probably around for a long time. Yet it began to have voice. When environmentalists talk about climate change, we usually hear about reducing demand. When the light bulbs burn out here, we replace them with more energy efficient ones. In our homes, we do that as well. As I shared with our children, one of the things I miss about the Pacific Northwest is the way we do the 3 R's. The reduce, the recycle, the reuse. I know when I go to a restaurant and I have my special treat of a bit of Sprite and it comes in either a can or a bottle, and when I hand it to the person when I'm finished, I want to ask, now this isn't just going in the garbage, right? We're going to recycle this. We're going to do the right thing here. So I miss that piece, and I'm thankful that composting is starting to get a little... Y'all do that, right? A little bit of traction here. And I hope we as a church with our mission will continue talking about what that would look like here for us as a community. So we hear about the individual demand, and then we hear about the government level where they put a price on carbon. And yet time, we have a bit of it, but not a lot of it. Those are important pieces as well. And yet what we know is that money talks. And that money has power in this keep it in the ground strategy. And it began with a fuel divestment campaign, which was this: if a company's business plan will break the planet, then we need to break ties with them. It started with the tiny Unity College in Maine, who just had $13 million in their portfolio, and they decided to divest from anybody who had fuel stock. And then the campaign accelerated, and it quickly became clear because of the math and the physics. So now colleges from Stanford to Oxford, Sydney to Edinburgh have joined in. They realize that it makes no sense to educate our young people like Sam and Jim and Cece and Emerson and Ruby when we break the planet by the businesses we support. Doctors in different continents have said we can't pretend to be interested in public health if we invest in companies that are destroying the planet. Churches like our wonderful United Church of Christ, the Unitarians, the Church of England, and Episcopalians insist that we have to care for the creation, and that's incompatible with its destruction. And yes, we know it will be an uphill battle. We know that because politicians are used to doing the bidding of oil companies, that they find some cachet and social currency there. And yet alternatives to fossil fuel are becoming cheaper by every passing day. The price of solar panels have fallen more than 70% in the last 6 years. Did you all see it on Facebook, that really cool truck that can show up and they roll out the solar panels? Did you all see that? It would have been helpful if I knew the link, right? And they could put it in farmers' fields. One of the cool things about being in Florida recently for the Stepping into Stewardship campaign, in the Disneyland world, in the Disney World mega world that they have there, all of the land, we would drive by all of these solar panels that they had, that they realized the importance of, yes, being part of the solution in the world in which we live. And yet all of this renewable energy is a bit of a threat to the hydrocarbon tycoons, McKibben tells us. And yet we need to continue holding them off for a few more years. And then we will have made that transition to clean energy irreversible. That it's possible, that it's going to be an uphill battle, but our actions matter, that it's possible. It's something that we can do and that we must do to keep this oil and this gas and this coal underground. And our theological underpinnings, the reason why we are able, as Christians who lean a little bit towards the progressive side, are able to proclaim this so boldly is from our scripture reading that Mary Kay read this morning. It's our theological foundational reasoning for why we can say this so boldly. And it's connected to our stewardship campaign. We've been a people the last couple of weeks with our, not just the last couple of weeks, we seem to move around with open hearts and open hands. Our stewardship campaign, open hearts, open hands. Open hands, open hearts. Playing with the reality, if all of who I am and all of what I have is a gift from God, how do I respond? If all of who we are and all of what we have as a people of God sitting here is a gift from God that's been entrusted to us, how do we respond? Yes, we've been talking about our financial treasures and how we share them here. And yet one of the ways that we answer that question is we look at how we care for our earth. Sally McFaig, in her work, The World is God's Body, asks this: what if the resurrection of the body were not seen as the resurrection of particular bodies that ascend, beginning with Jesus of Nazareth into another world, but as God's promise to be with us always in God's body, our world? What if God's promise of permanent presence to all space and time were imagined as a worldly reality, a palpable bodily presence? What if we do not have to go to some special place such as church, although I'm really glad we're all gathered here today, or somewhere else, another world, to be in the presence of God? What if we could feel ourselves in that presence at all times and in all places? What if we imagined God's presence as in us and in all others, including the last and the least? What if we viewed the world as God's body? That body that includes more than just Christians and more than just human beings. This model of the world as God's body then encourages us to holistic attitudes of responsibility, of care for the least and the vulnerable and the oppressed. In this Genesis story, we hear about God creating this world in this beautiful poetry. So if the world, the earth, is God's body, we are called to be stewards of this body, to be in right relationship with one another and our Mother Earth, to strive and protect and to restore the integrity of this earth. For God created and said and spoke and breathed and saw that it was very good. Not just kind of okay, it will do, but very good. Each of us right in this moment, is the latest unfolding of the event of creation. We are heirs of this long evolution of spirit. Our bodies are composed of material that was shaped in the Big Bang. This loving universe breathes us and breathes through us. Gives life and consciousness the capacity to recognize one another and to love others. Each stage in the development of the universe incorporates and transcends. That's what went before. We are part of this ongoing evolutionary reality that reminds us that yes, we are called halons, by Ken Wilber, that we are simultaneously separate beings seeking to maintain our own individual existence, and we are parts of something much bigger than ourselves. At this moment, we are this living, breathing piece of our universe, separate and yet connected, which reminds us of our unity of all beings. And the Genesis story that we heard about was written by the priestly writer. And there was an intentionality in the way that story was written, that beautiful poetry. At that time, there were quite a few Babylonian mythologies about how creation happened. And the Babylonian mythology usually had violence would birth creation. It's the remnants of the domination system that tries to keep people small and contained and in control. We hear about Tiamat in the salt waters of chaos, who was the primordial goddess of the ocean. That's quite a title she has, isn't it? She mated with Abzu, the god of fresh water, to produce younger gods. Yet she is killed, and her body split like a muscle by the young storm god Marduk, who builds the world out of her carcass. The heavens and earth are formed from her divided body. The priestly writer wanted nothing of this confusion and this chaos. The priestly writer wanted to make sure we weren't in this violence or this battle, and instead wanted to point us to a nurturing parent that participates in our lives in life-giving ways. If we're honest with ourselves this morning, we still see this splitting open of Mother Earth happening. And yet God calls us, being people who are created in God's image, our imago Dei, that inside of us is the likeness and the stuffness of God. That yes, we've been given dominion, but we might also call it stewardship or partnership or custodianship. Some kind of right relationship has been given to us and our Mother Earth as God's body and with one another that's been entrusted into our care. Chief Seattle tells us that humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. The more I play with that, I think it sounds a lot like stewardship. All things are bound together and our threads are connected with one another. If all of who I am and all that I have is a gift from God, the way that I respond, and Celeste and I respond through our gifts of time and talents and treasures, is one way that we've been entrusted to care not only for the earth and yet this community. As part of our stewardship campaign, we're praying with that question, how do we respond as generous people of God? Because we know that our choices matter. Where we spend our money, what type of businesses we go to, what type of movies we take in, the books we read. When we come here, we're reminding ourselves that we are connected one with another. And over 105 years, bold people such as yourselves have come to this place time and again to say how we spend and how we invest our financial treasures matters. And I say it a lot, but there's a lot going on in our world right now. The election that will happen will dictate quite a bit about the world that we want to live in. So you all coming and saying, yes, here are our financial treasures. is a magnificent gift. And it makes a huge difference in our lives and this world that we are building together, where we not only care for ourselves, we care for this glorious earth that's been entrusted to us. Thank you.
Do you know how huge it is? So the tears are just about the gratitude of being here with you and how much of a difference we can make together. So thank you for choosing this place to share your lives and your gifts, your time, your talents, and your treasures. Amen.